Catherine, Princess of Wales, whose life has brought her to the heart of the royal family's centuries-old tale, whose warmth and natural bonhomie shine through. She and William have grown and continue to grow into their role as modern senior royals. Catherine, never looking out of place or as anything other than the future Queen of the United Kingdom.
The spotlight is back on royalty. Welcome to the place where every royal glance sparks gossip and every smile feels like a calculated move. Tonight, we dive into a scene that had diplomats freezing mid-sentence and palace staff whispering behind closed doors. Picture this. A lavish state banquet where the chandeliers rained down light like liquid gold and the tables overflowed with silver and crystal fit for kings. But it wasn't the glitter or the grandeur that made jaws drop. It was one simple, quiet move from Catherine, the Princess of Wales. In just seconds, the entire mood of the room flipped. Even the Emir of Qatar, known for his tough, no-nonsense style, melted into admiration, showering Catherine with words of praise that echoed through the gilded hall like thunder. Suddenly, those weighty demands that had Whitehall trembling didn't feel so heavy anymore. This wasn't about fiery speeches or chest-thumping power games. It was elegance, delivered with a smile that could disarm the sharpest negotiator. A single gesture that showed exactly why Catherine commands the crown without saying a word. And here's the real twist. This glittering night didn't just happen out of nowhere. Catherine had been slowly stepping back into the spotlight after a year filled with challenges that tested her strength in ways the public could barely imagine. Her reappearance wasn't just about showing up. It was about showing resilience, grace, and a kind of quiet dominance that left the world stunned. It was nothing short of a masterclass in poise. Palace insiders whispered that Catherine had been carefully choosing her moments, saving her energy for only the occasions where her presence could shake the room and shift the balance. And this state visit with the Emir of Qatar, it was exactly one of those nights destined to be written into history. On the surface, it looked like the usual royal pageantry, glittering announcements, polished speeches, promises of stronger ties between two nations tied by history and ambition. But beneath the polished exterior, the tension was thick. The Emir didn't just arrive with polite greetings. He came armed with expectations, requests for investments and partnerships that insiders hinted could tilt the scales in ways Britain might not have liked. Behind palace doors, sources revealed endless preparation, from seating charts studied like battle plans to speech notes combed over until they gleamed. Nothing was left to chance. William, calm as ever, stood right at Catherine's side, his steady presence anchoring the storm. But everyone knew who would end up stealing the night. Catherine didn't need fiery words. She turned the tide with one unforgettable, perfectly timed gesture that had the whole palace buzzing. As the carriages rolled up to Buckingham Palace and the guards snapped to attention, no one could have guessed that Catherine's subtle move would completely flip the evening's course. This was diplomacy stripped down to its core. Power woven into grace, and proof that sometimes the softest touch can change everything. The day began with pure royal spectacle. A ceremonial welcome at Horse Guards Parade set the stage, where Catherine and William greeted the Emir of Qatar and his wife, Sheikha Jawahar, under a sharp autumn sky that seemed painted for the moment. Catherine stepped out in a tailored emerald coat, her elegance impossible to miss, and that dazzling smile of hers sliced right through the stiff formality like sunlight melting frost. But make no mistake, this was just the opening act. The true showstopper was waiting later that evening, the state banquet at Buckingham Palace, a glittering gathering designed to lock in goodwill with champagne toasts and carefully woven stories. And here's the twist. Behind all that glamour, Catherine had been putting in serious work. Sources whispered she studied cultural notes with almost surgical precision, even learning Arabic phrases to honor Qatari traditions, subtle moves that screamed respect without ever needing grand displays. It's Catherine's style, duty stitched seamlessly with authentic curiosity. Meanwhile, William played his part as the steady protector, cracking jokes about tie knots and toast lengths during rehearsals, keeping the mood light when the pressure was building. But no one could ignore the undercurrent. This wasn't just about sparkle and show. The stakes were running deep, and every move carried weight. The Emir's agenda was sharp and uncompromising. Energy collaborations sat at the top of his list, promising Britain much-needed economic boosts, but with strings attached. Advisors behind the scenes were uneasy. whispering that the proposals his team carried in their polished briefcases leaned heavily toward Qatari interests, tilting the balance in their favor. The atmosphere was tense, the kind where one wrong move could send talks spiraling, and that's when Catherine stepped into the frame. She wasn't scripted to be the dealmaker. No, her power wasn't in contracts or figures. Her strength was in her presence, the human touch that could melt the hardest exterior. Insiders revealed that she channeled her own recent struggles, pouring every ounce of resilience she had cultivated into this public stage. With her calm poise and quiet strength, she became the bridge no negotiation could draft on paper. The day moved like clockwork. A luncheon in the picture gallery where polite laughter danced over crystal glasses, light chatter hiding the weight of what was at stake. But all of this was just the build-up to the main act. Later, Catherine emerged in a breathtaking gown of ivory silk, embroidered with delicate desert-inspired patterns, a subtle, deliberate nod to her guest's heritage. She stood before the mirror, adjusting her tiara with a look that mixed elegance and determination, her resolve unshakable. This wasn't just another royal event. It was a living reminder that diplomacy doesn't always thrive on contracts and numbers, but on connection and grace. As the family gathered, King Charles himself gave Catherine a warm pat on the shoulder, sealing the moment with a gesture that carried the weight of history. The palace walls practically buzzed with anticipation. No one could have guessed that one woman's instinct would flip the script, transforming what should have been just another formal banquet into a night whispered about as a story of harmony and surprise. The second those towering doors of Buckingham Palace creaked open, the spectacle kicked into motion. Carriages rolled to a graceful stop, and out stepped the emir, tall, commanding, dressed in traditional robes that carried the weight of his heritage. At his side, Sheikha Jawahir shimmered in gold, her gown glowing under the palace lights like molten sunlight. But in that instant, attention drifted elsewhere. All eyes locked on Catherine. She descended beside William, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the two moving as though choreographed, a portrait of royal elegance that cameras couldn't stop chasing. Flashbulbs popped, silk whispered against marble floors, and the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. Palace staff lined the halls, bowing as the entourage made its way toward the grand ballroom, a banquet space that glittered like a jewel box pried wide open. The tables gleamed with Wedgwood porcelain and crystal so bright it looked like starlight frozen in glass. Cascading flowers, fresh from the palace gardens, spilled across the room. White roses and orchids woven together as a quiet symbol of bonds meant to last. Then came the moment of true theatre. Catherine seated near the head table, poised between William and a senior Qatari minister, her posture regal, her gaze alive and magnetic. Conversation rippled around her like waves hitting the shore. Light banter about London's autumn chill gave way to deeper exchanges, equestrian passions, children's charities, stories that revealed softer connections. Across the table, the emir sat opposite King Charles, a man of authority whose every word dripped with strategy. His tone was firm, his requests carefully layered into the talk, especially when it came to investments. Demands that could stretch Britain thin if not carefully balanced. Every clink of silver against porcelain was like a chess piece moving across the board, a subtle game of power playing out under the glow of chandeliers. Yet Catherine didn't falter. She listened. She smiled. She bridged the cultural divide with ease. At one point, recalling details from her briefing, she spoke about a Qatari festival celebrating family, weaving in her own tale of her children's joy at similar traditions back home. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct, and it landed perfectly. Laughter rippled across the banquet hall, softening edges that had felt razor-sharp just moments before. William caught Catherine's gaze, giving her a discreet nod of pride as the courses flowed in, from delicate canapes to roasted pheasant so rich it seemed fit for an empire. But beneath the glitter and fine dining, the tension still simmered. The air carried weight. Insiders later admitted that one slip in tone, one wrong word, could have unraveled the entire night's goodwill. Through it all, Catherine burned steady, like a quiet flame in the storm. In a gentle pause, she leaned toward Sheikha Jawahir, her voice calm but precise, complimenting a brooch that shimmered with heritage and history. That single remark wasn't small talk, it was a thread, weaving personal respect into the larger political fabric. And nobody at that moment realized her simplest, most instinctive act was about to shift the emir's carefully guarded stance, cracking open dialogue where there had only been demands. As the evening deepened, chandeliers washed the hall in golden light, while a string quartet sent ribbons of music weaving through the air. Then came the turning point. The speeches. King Charles rose first, his words polished, a tapestry of warmth laced with Arabic phrases that lit the room with admiration, applause rolling through the crowd like velvet thunder. The emir followed, poised and commanding, his tone wrapped in courtesy but edged with strategy. Each phrase slid carefully into place, gracious on the surface yet carrying sharp undertones. Hints of expectations mapped out in pre-visit memos, reminders of what Qatar wanted on the table. Silverware froze mid-air as every ear tuned in, the atmosphere heavy with stakes. Catherine sat unshaken, her necklace of pearls gleaming like an emblem of continuity, her poise absolute. But beneath that calm exterior, her mind was racing. She had studied this man, knew the emir's reputation for sharpness, for pushing terms that stretched far beyond Britain's comfort zone. And in that moment, she wasn't just present. She was calculating, waiting, prepared to strike with subtlety no strategist could anticipate. Politics may set the stage, but Catherine knew the real power always bowed to people, and as plates of pistachio mousse glided onto the tables, she sensed her moment had come, the one that would etch this banquet into memory. The conversation at her table shifted naturally, drifting into talk of family legacies, a subject that always lit Catherine from within. Sheikha Jawahar's eyes gleamed as she proudly shared stories of her children's pursuits in art and sport, her voice glowing with maternal pride. Catherine leaned in with that same spark, adding a gentle anecdote about Prince George's latest school project, a small detail, but one that instantly built a bridge of motherhood stretching across continents. That's when something remarkable happened. The emir, usually stone-faced and reserved, leaned in ever so slightly. Insiders later swore his expression softened, just a fraction, but enough to change the entire rhythm of the evening. The chatter quieted, the air thick with possibility. And in that fragile pause, Catherine seized it. No dramatic speech, no staged diplomacy, just instinct. She reached across the table, not for a stiff handshake, but to gently rest her hand on Sheikha Jawahar's for a brief, sisterly touch. The gesture was fleeting, but it radiated solidarity and authenticity, sending a current straight through the gathering. Then came the moment of electricity. Catherine lifted her gaze, locking eyes with the emir himself. Her look carried no agenda, no negotiation, just pure recognition of shared humanity across gilded walls. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended, and when the emir blinked, a smile broke across his face. The room's formal shell cracked wide open in that instant, and nothing was the same after. And then came the moment no one expected, a real smile from the emir, not the polished diplomatic mask. He lifted his glass, not to policy or politics, but directly to Catherine, murmuring words of admiration for her grace under the world's relentless gaze. Instantly, whispers spread like wildfire among aides circling the room. What had felt like an iron wall of demands began to bend, the emir's once heavy asks dissolving into gentler, more open suggestions. Catherine hadn't pushed or forced change. She had sparked it with nothing more than a single human touch. That gesture deserves its own place in the history books. It wasn't a flawless curtsy like the one she performed that very morning before King Charles, dipping low with the precision of a seasoned dancer. Nor was it the sweeping wave to the cheering crowds outside Buckingham's gates. No, this was something more intimate, something that slipped past all the velvet and gold, unfolding quietly within the banquet's charged glow. As Sheikha Jawahar shared a moving story of Qatari resilience, Catherine leaned in, her head tilted ever so slightly, every line of her face etched with empathy. And then, as if pulled by an invisible string, her hand reached across, not in ceremony, but in instinct. Fingers brushed lightly, carrying a warmth that soared far beyond protocol. The gesture said without words, "I see you. I value this." At that exact moment, the emir, Deep in thought, mid-sentence about a collaboration that had advisors shifting nervously in their seats, faltered. The calculation in his tone cracked, replaced by something startlingly human. His gaze lingered on the brush of contact, then on her face, something unspoken shifting between them. Rules asked for restraint, yet here was honesty, unguarded and alive. The fork touched porcelain, the faint clink cutting the silence like a signal. In the stillness that followed, he turned, voice lowered to the kind of register reserved for secrets and trust. He spoke not of crowns or ceremony, but of her quiet resilience, the kind of strength that filled a room without demanding it, the grace that could turn a stranger into an ally. Words came easier than expected, admiration for her healing, her steady devotion to family, the way she could shrink the overwhelming into something human, manageable. It didn't sound rehearsed, it sounded like a gift. And in that moment, the weight shifted. The sharp edges of negotiation, the veiled demands that had once leaned too hard against Britain's share, began to soften. What replaced them was curiosity, willingness, space for give and take instead of rigidity. William noticed, his fingers brushing hers beneath the table, a private celebration only she could feel. Across the room, Charles lifted a brow, faint but unmistakable, his silence speaking approval. Even the toast that followed carried a different tone, layered now with something deeper than formality. An aide's pen raced across the page, rewriting the night in real time. Catherine, unshaken, brushed it off with a soft laugh, nudging the mood back toward simpler things, shared joys, the sound of children's laughter carrying across cultures. Yet the undercurrent remained, a ripple widening into a wave. Insiders called it her quiet gift, the way she disarmed without disarming herself. Grace as armor, dignity as strategy. In a world drawn in hard edges, she traced in softer lines, and it worked. Coffee arrived in polished silver, steam rising, cups delicate as porcelain secrets. The emir had shifted. Where once he leaned back, arms folded in quiet resistance, now his hands opened, palms forward, gestures alive. The conversation stretched past numbers into memory, beyond contracts into vision. He asked for her thoughts on youth, on balancing duty with joy, and in doing so, leaned closer into her orbit. Cameras caught it. The rare spark in his eyes, the animated sweep of his hands, as if the formality of state had been replaced by something warmer, more human. By the time the party rose for the receiving line, the storm had passed. What began as heavy, immovable demands were now reduced to footnotes, replaced by pledges of collaboration that balanced pride with partnership. Advisors who had braced for a long, grinding battle found themselves exhaling in unison, the night ending not with stalemate, but with surprise harmony. She turned the tide with a touch. "No negotiations required," one aide muttered, half in disbelief, half in awe. William, glowing beside her, later told a confidant that her intuition always seemed to find the human thread others overlooked. Even the shaker drew her close, whispering gratitude for the solidarity that had given the evening its heartbeat. As the crowd spilled into Buckingham's moonlit gardens for cordials, laughter drifted across the autumn air, light and unforced, a far cry from the taut silence that had preceded dinner. Outside, the press dressed the story in polished headlines, crediting royal hospitality for the night's success. But those within the walls knew better. It wasn't the pageantry that shifted the tide, but Catherine's quiet gesture, her ability to speak without words. It was the same gift that had once charmed world leaders with tales of her children's antics, softening even the hardest of brows. A reminder, once more, that empathy dissolves walls far quicker than edicts ever could. But this felt different. This felt personal. A victory born not from strategy memos or staged rehearsals, but from Catherine's own evolution. Health challenges had carved resilience into her, sharpening her gift for empathy until it was no longer just instinct, but art. She had emerged not only stronger, but wiser in the subtle architecture of connection. The emir departed the next morning with firm handshakes and warm farewells, his praise for Catherine echoing in public remarks, a nod that magnified the private pivot. For once, diplomacy's triumph wasn't hidden in corridors or reduced to fine print. It was spoken aloud. Back at Windsor, the family gathered in the quiet glow of home. Tea poured, tails wagged, and George and Charlotte listened, eyes wide as William recounted Mama's magic at the banquet. To them, It wasn't geopolitics, it was wonder, proof that kindness could move mountains, and that perhaps was the real victory, not just for the crown, but for the woman who wears it with such unforced grace. Zoom out, and the night becomes more than a single success. It becomes a glimpse of the monarchy Catherine is quietly shaping, less about rigid ceremony, more about human bridges, a monarchy where strength isn't measured in dominance, but in dignity, where the softest gesture carries the weight of history. It was not isolated, it wove into the larger fabric of her journey, a thread of quiet revolution stitched with resilience and intent. After months of stepping back to focus on healing, her return has been nothing short of deliberate. Each appearance now carries the weight of meaning, a statement of strength measured not in spectacle, but in substance. This banquet was proof. It revealed Catherine not merely as consort, but as a force in the realm of soft power. Those closest to her describe a woman who studies not just protocols, but people, who anticipates needs with uncanny precision. Her gesture at that table wasn't improvisation, it was the culmination of lessons drawn from her past. Rallying support when shadows loomed, transforming sympathy into solidarity. For William, it underscored the partnership that defines them. His watchful glances across the gilded hall were less about protection, more about recognition of her gift. For their children in Windsor, it became the kind of story that endures, a family legend teaching that influence is not a matter of might, but of compassion. And for the Emir, whose softened stance set aside those lopsided asks, it revealed another truth. Catherine's appeal transcends borders. She embodies both tradition and modernity, disarming even the most resolute negotiator with the authenticity of her presence. Insiders now whisper that her touch that night did more than thaw a dinner. It reshaped the tone of follow-up talks, paving a path to exchanges more balanced, more equitable. Yet the real beauty lay in the personal. Post-event, Catherine reflected in a rare, unguarded exchange with aides, noting how the touch reminded her of holding her children's hands through storms, a grounding force, both fragile and unbreakable. It humanized the grandeur, proving that even royals crave connection as deeply as anyone. King Charles, ever the keen observer, followed up with a note of thanks, calling her the evening's true star. Queen Camilla, watching from afar, offered her own quiet nod of respect. For once, the monarchy's triumph wasn't measured in glittering crowns or golden carriages, but in something subtler. Empathy turned into diplomacy. This was monarchy evolving, less about spectacle, more about substance. With Catherine at its empathetic core, it signaled to the world that Britain stands not on might alone, but on the grace of its guardians, a family that has weathered grief, scrutiny, and glare. Moments like this are lifelines. They reaffirm a path forward where kindness shapes policy, where gestures outlast speeches, and in them, Catherine endures, not just as Duchess, Princess, or future Queen, but as what the people see most clearly, their princess. Her gestures were not just diplomatic tools, but extensions of a soul seeking unity above all. As the curtains fell on that evening, one truth gleamed brighter than crystal chandeliers. Catherine had done more than shift the course of a banquet. She had redefined what royal influence can mean. A gentle force, bending wills without breaking spirits. From one touch flowed a cascade of goodwill. The Emir's praise became a chorus that drowned out discord, his demands dissolving quietly into dust. It was a night where elegance met empathy and tradition danced with tomorrow. For William and Catherine, it cemented their legacy as modern royals, proving that in a world crowded with headlines, heart still leads. And for their children, the lesson will live on, that true duty is not carried in crowns or scepters, but in the simple power of kindness worn with a smile. And for the monarchy, it whispers of renewal, a crown lighter on the brow, yet heavier with hope. Insiders suggest her approach could shape future engagements, a blueprint for bridging divides. But beyond the sparkle, it's the simplicity that lingers. One gesture, one connection, and everything changes. So what do you make of Catherine's magic? Does it show the royals as weavers of warmth in a cold arena, or is it simply another page in her book of brilliance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. If her grace moved you, tap like, share with a fellow royal watcher, and subscribe for more unmissable revelations. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers. They always tell the real story.